In a drafty warehouse in Dublin's north inner city, the finishing touches are being applied to an imposing bronze statue. The larger-than-life sculpture depicts the most beloved racehorse of the 20th century, Arkle.
Well, there he is, #1, Arkle. Certainly the chaser of the decade, if not the chaser of the century.
The Arkle story is much, much more than a racing story. It's to do with a nation having a yearning for something that they can really believe in.
Arkle was an enormous shot in the arm for Irish sport generally and for national pride.
We all worshipped him as much as Ireland did, and everybody loves a champion, just in a completely, utterly different league.
He was such a genuine legend, wasn't he? He's the best I've ever seen, certainly.
And now Arkle opening up now, like a sports car.
He was invincible. He just had that aura about him. Muhammad Ali was sort of invincible for a long time. Tiger Woods was invincible for a while. And Arkle was invincible for those 3 or 4 years.
It was an optimistic age, the 60s. People were just beginning to see the world through television. And you could see John F. Kennedy, you could see the Beatles, and Arkle was one of those iconic figures.
People always like heroes, and I think they bought into the legend of his Arkle, and he just kept delivering.
Racing is full of passing dreams. That's what it peddles. What Arkle was and is, he's an eternal dream.
Good luck in the next race.
Cheltenham, the cathedral of national hunt racing. Thousands of horses have jumped these fabled fences. Golden Miller, Desert Orchid, Porto Star, all names that resonate in the heart of the Cheltenham faithful. But the memories of Arkle are most powerful of all. Arkle's story began in the gentle hills north of Dublin, where he was born at Ballymacole Stud in the spring of 1957. The foal, who would become the greatest steeplechaser in history, spent the first years of his life being reared by Mary Baker and her daughter Alison in Malahau.
When I was choosing a horse for Bright Cherry to visit, I chose a thoroughbred, something that would have speed, because Bright Cherry on her side has stamina. So I sent her to Arkle. What came out of that was Arkle.
Educating and selling horses for profit was the Bakers' business. So in 1960, Arkle was sent to Gough Sales in Dublin.
Ladies and gentlemen, lot 96. Starting, please. 1500, 12.
The still unnamed 3-year-old fetched 1,150 guineas, the highest price ever for a Baker horse, and Arkle was about to meet the most important woman in his life, his new owner.
Duchess of Westminster.
She was very splendid because she was a very obviously sort of bold hunting lady. And she was very jolly to me. She had this amazing deep voice. A really deep voice.
But he certainly is a wonder horse, what he's done. And he has captured the imagination of people that perhaps are in no way interested in racing. It's rather like if one had a very famous relation discussing him, because one does look on him rather, as one of the family.
The Duchess was born Nancy Sullivan. She grew up in this privileged Anglo-Irish atmosphere, something like a Molly Keane novel. She was a very, very accomplished horsewoman. She was spotted by the notorious, extraordinary man that was Hugh Grosvenor, the second Duke of Westminster, who had a remarkably checkered background.
Already thrice married, the Duke had numerous other liaisons, including a 10-year affair with Coco Chanel.
He had an immense fortune. He was probably the richest person in England at the time. He was 36 years her senior, And I think he had probably begun to mellow in those days.
She really almost tamed him, I think is the word. Certainly loved him. Now, they were only married 6 years, and he died. I think that's when the horses really took a stronger sway with her, and she became very involved.
I think it probably did fill a sort of void in her life, and it became her abiding passion.
The Duchess had bought Arkle on the recommendation of the leading Irish trainer of the day, Tom Draper.
Oh, I saw him when he was a 4, and I saw him when he was a yearling, and I saw him when he was a 3-year-old. And I told the Duchess to go and look at him. So she went and she bought him. And he came back to here. And he wasn't very encouraging for a long time.
The unusual thing about him compared to the modern day trainers is that he had a very small number of horses. And as a result, Arkle could get the personal care and attention that he needed. If you have 200 horses, it's more difficult to do than if you have a handful of horses. And Arkle had it with Tom Draper's.
My memory of my father, very quiet, didn't say a whole lot, just like everything done properly. Patience with horses. He totally ignored their age. Just because they all of a sudden became 5-year-olds doesn't mean they had to do this. Either they could or they couldn't. And allow a horse mature and allow a horse show when he was ready, rather than naming a day 6 months in advance. That was, I would think, the secret.
He was completely and absolutely dedicated to it. He loved horses, he loved the job, and he hasn't any hobbies. I mean, that is his life, just training race horses.
You go in front, Pat. Go that way.
Tom Draper's patient approach meant there was no pressure on Arkle in his debut over jumps at Navan. Pat Taff, the Drapers' stable jockey, opted to ride Kerfra, a proven winner. Paddy Woods, Arkle's regular work rider, thought his big moment had come.
We're coming out of the gallop that morning and the boss said to Pat, what do you want to ride at Navan? Pat said, Kerfra. And I was delighted. I thought I'd be riding him at Navan. And the next thing was the boss man said different and then said, well then Liam, I'll let you ride Arkle. I was furious.
Tom put up Liam McLaughlin, one of our own boys, and said to him, go out there and see what he's made of, but don't be too hard on him. So Liam went out, and now everybody watched Kerfro, nobody took any notice, and suddenly a horse came up under the stand, and this was Arkle.
And Arkle sailed past the two of them. That was the first time it began to dawn on me that he was very...
That he was something special.
Yeah.
And this led to one of the great understatements of racing history, really, when Tom Draper was coming down from the stand after this with his wife Betty. And he said, you know, I think we might have something there.
Pat Taff made sure he was on Arkle in his next race. The young horse, burning with potential, had found the people who would turn him into a legend.
Pat Taff was the jockey, Tom Draper, the trainer, both great men in Irish racing folklore. He had pedigree on all sides. Great trainer, great jockey.
The Duchess was a sort of an aloof person, but she was the sort of person you considered should own a racehorse. A duchess or a princess. He had all the right credentials.
They were a most unusual quartet. They were all different types. They were all great, but the wonderful teamwork that existed between them. Never one blaming the other for anything. They were a team. They sank or swam together.
His huge advantage in life was that nobody hurried him, nobody expected a lot of him early on. His first steeplechase was not in Ireland in some quiet meeting, but at a big meeting in Cheltenham, November 1962. And this was really sort of being thrown in at the deep end.
When they came round the last turn, Arkle suddenly was much better. It really was all those sort of phrases people use about turbos. He just sort of disappeared, he just left them.
At that stage, he hadn't established himself as the great horse he became. He was only on the way up. He was a challenger to the king.
The following year's Cheltenham Festival saw Arkle's star continue to rise, with a comfortable victory in the Broadway Chase. But the undisputed king of Cheltenham was the Gold Cup champion, an imposing equine superstar named Millhouse.
He was a real eyeful of horse, you know. He had a lovely action. He'd jump well. He'd everything going for him. He was light on his feet, like a dancer.
Here is Millhouse, possibly one of the greatest chasers of the post-war years.
Yeah, I had a picture of Millhouse on my wall at school. Sort of sensible boys had pictures of Bridget Bardot and Marilyn Monroe, and I actually had a picture of Millhouse. Now, when Millhouse was at his prime, I thought he was God.
To be a great champion, for that to be affirmed, you need a great adversary, and that's what Millhouse was.
Arkle's jockey Pat Taff knew Millhouse well. He'd schooled him in Ireland before he was sent to Lambourne to one of Britain's leading trainers, Fulk Walwyn.
Well, we thought, of course, he was probably the best horse that Fulk ever had when he won the first Gold Cup. He'd sort of built himself up into being a wonder horse.
Funnily enough, Millhouse, of course, was he was an Irish horse, but as so often, he'd been bought to come to Britain. So he was the British horse, and everyone said it was the best horse Fulk Walwyn had ever had, etc., etc. Then Ireland claimed they had a better one, which is why you want a showdown.
A contest between the pride of England and the young Irish contender was a thrilling prospect. It came in November's Hennessy Gold Cup at Newbury.
Millhouse had won the Gold Cup Best English Horse 4 years, and then Arkle, the young pretender, taking him on, this upstart from Ireland. And I think people loved that idea of clashing generations, clashing countries, and I think that's endured to this day.
From the start, Arkle stayed close behind Millhouse, but at the third last fence, Arkle stumbled and broke his stride.
It's Millhouse from Arkle, but Arkle a bad mistake, and Arkle's almost blundered his way out of the race there.
The visibility was very bad that day, and you couldn't see the extent to which he'd made a mistake or whether he'd lost his footing, you know.
Arkle never recovered from his error, finishing the race in third, almost 9 lengths behind Millhouse.
The big debating point will be what difference did that error of Arkle's make, made at a point when he was very nearly stride for stride with the great Millhouse.
Tom said, will you beat Millhouse next time, Pat? Without a doubt, says Pat.
Arkle was still a little bit immature. I know he slipped and everything else, and probably if he was more mature, he wouldn't have slipped. There should never have been any more than heads and necks between the two of them.
That was game over, bad luck. England won, Ireland 0, and off we go. Millhouse is absolutely invincible.
Arkle would soon have a second chance to topple the invincible one, this time on racing's biggest stage of all. His chance of revenge was the 1964 Cheltenham Gold Cup. Anticipation was sky high for a contest the papers called the race of the century.
When it came to the Gold Cup in '64, it was very much a showdown. It had been billed as such.
And it was seen then as a clash between the very best of Ireland and the very best of England. The build-up to it was terrific, and because people knew that whatever happened, this would sort of set the order of that sport for the next few years.
Television helped stoke the excitement. The race had been moved to a Saturday with the hope of attracting a vast TV audience.
When Arkle went over, when he went abroad, you know, he was running for Ireland. There was a lot of noise, a lot of talk, and all merited for Millhouse. And then the wonderful day when they were meeting.
It was the Saturday Showdown. It's a happy and almost unique situation that they build a showdown, and it was even better than they could have built it.
If I was playing for Manchester United as a kid, it was 63, 64, and I met the owner of Millhouse. I can't quite remember where or what circumstances, socially. And he said, my lad will never be beaten. And it was said with such confidence.
Expectation was building, and the bookies made Millhouse the odds-on favourite. Johnny Lumley, the groom who'd bought Arkle to Cheltenham, found his opposite numbers were certain of victory.
This big man there, Joe Carey was his name. Joe was about 16 stone. They turned to Joe and says, "It's like this, Joe." He said, "You could ride Millhouse tomorrow and he'd win." Like, and that's how confident they were, you know what I mean?
Well, I always thought after that Hennessy that if ever they meet again, Arkle is the best horse. Well, my great pal Willie Robinson thought otherwise. He just said, "No, you won't beat me this year."
And I walked out into the ring and I saw Arkle. I said, "Crumbs, he looks twice the horse than what he did at Newbury."
Millhouse was a big horse. He was a terrific, relentless galloper. He just soared over the fences. Arkle was smaller, and he was expected to be the horse that needed to be held up. So the people expected Millhouse to make the running.
Neither Pat or Willie Robinson could envisage defeat. I shared Willie's view that a good big un would beat a good little un, you know, and I'm ashamed to say I tipped him to beat Arkle in the Express. I didn't have a bet, I wasn't that stupid. Pat could see I was drifting a little bit towards Millhouse, I think, you know, and he'd say, "Don't go betting now against this horse of mine. Don't go betting against Arkle."
And they're off, and Millhouse jumps straight into the lead from Parcel, Arkle and King's Nephew.
Well, it very, very quickly developed into an absolute match between the two horses.
And it's the big two now as they run down the hill to the third last fence. The big horse, Millhouse, with Arkle closing on him.
And as they went round the second circuit, when obviously things are heating up, Millhouse kept throwing in these big, big jumps, and Arkle was always just behind him.
And Pat being shouted for from the stands now. Irish voices really beginning to call for him now as he starts to make up ground.
Worked into a duel between the two of them. Willie let Millhouse roll on down the hill. Pat was sitting on his tail, joined him at the third last, jumped the second last together, they rounded the bend.
Still going, great guns, both of them. It's Millhouse on the inside, jumps it only just ahead of Arkle.
There was just this great collective roar. Here he comes. And he did come.
And this is the race now to the last fence. It's Arkle on the stand side for Ireland and Millhouse for England on the far side.
Arkle does obviously take command when it really matters.
On the far side, coming up towards the line, and Arkle is holding him. Arkle going away now from Millhouse. This is the champion. This is the best we've seen for a long time. Arkle is the winner of the Gold Cup. Millhouse is...
The race of the century had delivered on its promise. Arkle's victory over Millhouse, seen by millions on live television, would be an eternal chapter in the story of national hunt racing.
Like all great events, like great masterpieces, I think, the more you look at them, the better they become.
I think if you look at the film, and I watched it so many times, I think until they sort of level up for home, there was still an element of doubt about it. But it's emphatic enough at the end, and you've got that great Peter O'Sullivan commentary.
This is the champion. This is the best we've seen for a long time. Arkle is the winner of the Gold Cup.
That was one of those rare occasions when one was possibly right, you know. Yes, it was a delight. But I mean, the whole race was a delight because it was very, very exciting and very emotional.
Afterwards in the weighing room, you know, people had this great sense that it was very, very decisive. There were no excuses, and you had the feeling that the game had changed. There was a terrible come down for Willie Robinson.
The anticlimax after that, I was devastated. You're really let down. I was really shattered.
I think that was Fuchs' most shattering moment of all his career, really. He could not believe it. He just thought that Millhouse was unbeatable.
Arkle returned home to a hero's welcome.
He's a pet of a horse, and everybody seems to like him, you know.
It's always lovely.
He's a national hero, in fact. They all own him.
Tell us what the conversation's like in the evening here in the pub.
Oh, they're all, no, there's only Arkle.
Yeah, Arkle was the Irish hero who went over to England as the underdog, took on the British hero who was fully expected to beat him, and beat him in his own backyard. Ireland then, obviously, we were underdogs at everything that we did. Any Irish victory was to be celebrated, and any Irish victory, especially over the British.
It was wonderful to behold. And it showed that Ireland was absolutely bloody good at something.
In those years, Ireland was pretty much impoverished. A lot of the best young Irish horses, particularly national hunt horses, were sold to England when they were very young. So we couldn't really compete.
Ireland breeds most good jumpers. Ancestry, grassland, climate and time combine successfully. English trainers seek young stock there.
The horses were bred here, but most of them are trained in Britain. The focus changes after the Second World War, when Vincent O'Brien first begins to build up his own stable strength. That's followed by Tom Draper. And for the first time, Irish horses are able to compete on level terms, and it becomes much more a sort of nationalistic thing.
For the Irish abroad, Arkle was a shining symbol of victory and success. The factory floors and building sites of Britain echoed with excited chat about the Irish wonder horse.
That time in England, a lot of people went over working there and one thing and the other, and the climate mightn't have been quite as good as it is now, and Irish were Irish, do you know what I mean? And I think you had this king of a horse that was able to put everybody in their place, and he was one of ours. Just made so proud. For the Irish fellas that emigrated to England, they could go and watch him and say, that's our horse, that's the Irish horse. Up yours.
The Irish Grand National in '64 was Arkle's first race after the '64 Gold Cup against Mill House. And the Irish Grand National is a handicap, and Arkle had shown himself to be so superior that they changed the handicapping rules. The handicaps are framed theoretically into order to equalise the chances of a horse, therefore make races a better betting medium, because if you know horse A is better than horse B, there's not much of a betting medium if horse A always beats horse B. It's as simple as if you handicapped Mo Farah by putting several pounds of sugar in his pocket.
The handicapper Louis McGee at the time, in order to equalise all the horses' chances, he had to devise a new system because of Arkle. Never before had this had to be done. They could always accommodate horses within the handicap. He then produced a if Arkle runs scenario, if he doesn't run.
Arkle started the race burdened with 2 stone more than his nearest rival, but it made no difference to the outcome.
It's hard to think that in 1964 a horse changed a system that was there for maybe 100 years. Could you imagine somebody in any game like changing the whole rules of golf or the whole rules of cricket or rugby? One person. This was one horse changed all that. It's phenomenal.
He beat his contemporaries, he beat them well, be it on level terms or in handicap terms. He was that far ahead of them.
Some of the things Arkle tried to do in handicaps are absolutely phenomenal. One day at Leopardstown, Arkle beat a horse trained by the great Paddy Slater called Scottish Memories, gave him almost 3 stone. Paddy Slater came over after and just shook my father's hand and said, I didn't think there was a horse alive could do that. It was really when he started doing those things in handicaps, it became apparent that he was exceptional.
Arkle was on a roll. In December, he easily beat Millhouse in the Hennessy, and then proceeded to Cheltenham, where he humbled his rival with a witheringly dominant 20-length victory in the Gold Cup.
In all, they ran against each other 5 times, and Arkle won 4 of them. Millhouse won that first Hennessy, but he never got near him again.
The point about Millhouse was that it wasn't as if Arkle was beating, donkeys. He was actually beating a horse that itself had been thought to be invincible. Now Arkle comes along and doesn't just beat him, he kills him.
Really, like, sort of knocking your head up against a brick wall, really. Every time we met him, we got beaten by. Millhouse is a great horse on his own. It was just his great misfortune to be the same years as Arkle, because otherwise he would have won 4 Gold Cups and he would have been the horse of the century instead of Arkle. So that was really his misfortune.
His arch-rival had been defeated, but Arkle's greatest performance was yet to come. Rising. By 1965, he was a worldwide celebrity.
Seems to be all over the world. People seem to know about Arkle, and I can only think a great deal of it is to do with his tremendous sort of personality.
Arkle, ears pricked, thoroughly interested in everything all around him.
He was more aware of himself and the interest in him than any horse I'd ever seen.
When he walked around a parade ring before his races, he'd look around and he knew that they were all there for him, and he lapped up.
Always looks so terribly proud and rather showing off. I would say playing to his public.
Number 1 on the card, Arkle. There he is, walking as if he quite realises that he is the centre of attention and wants everybody to have a good look at him.
It's always been said, and I think it's quite true, that he loves proud and he loves... He really is rather no show-off. He loves people looking at him.
Cool as the proverbial cucumber.
His ears would come and he would look around, so the neck would be up and his head would swivel. He'd look around. People would be sort of going ooh and eyeing because he's looking at us.
He had the charisma for one thing. That's something that he developed. There's a story of him taking the race card out of a spectator's hand as he was parading around the paddock in Cheltenham.
Gregory Peck was sort of the film star at that time, and Arkle was sort of the Gregory Peck. He just stood out. When people wanted to get closer to him, you could pet him and rub him. He won people's hearts that way.
Arkle came along at the right time in terms of social history, in terms of technology through television. And obviously millions could watch him on television as opposed to thousands at a racecourse. He was huge box office.
He brought it to the front page, and with the result that ordinary people took an interest, many of whom may have stayed interested in racing. You couldn't have bought, as an advertising agency, what he did for racing.
Everybody wanted a piece of the action. When Arkle was snapped drinking stout, Guinness cannily promised a lifetime supply. His portrait could be found in pubs from Belfast to Ballybunion. Arkle had become an industry.
Everybody has their little idiosyncrasy. Some people collect coins, other people collect stamps. I collect racing memorabilia. All I wanted to do was collect every race card that I could, or any little piece of memorabilia relating to Arkle. We would have approximately 250 items relating directly to Arkle. Now, they're mainly race cards and fan mail. Now, this is the saddle that Pat Taff used on Arkle, and to me, it was the ultimate piece of racing memorabilia. I bought it for 11,000 sterling, which I thought was, you know, it didn't matter what price it was going to be, I was going to buy it. And we just go around here, we have this particular race card. Now, in my opinion, this is Arkle's greatest race, the Gallagher Gold Cup of 1965.
To the left, over on the right, is Arkle, who's just eased his way into the picture.
This was a handicap, and Arkle carried 16 pounds more than Millhouse. And the word was that Millhouse was coming back to his best. There's a big anticipation about whether the difference of 16 pounds in weight would mean that Arkle would be beaten by Millhouse this time. And if you wonder about this, you can go and weigh out from sugar from your kitchen cupboard 16 pounds. It's quite a lot of weight difference to carry over 3 miles.
The Gallagher Gold Cup would have been the best performance I thought he ever put up. Millhouse had already won twice that season. He was having his first run. Running into the straight, I think Millhouse went about 6 lengths up, and everybody said, this is over. And the next thing like that has changed.
Millhouse was ridden by David Nicholson, and as Nicholson used to tell it, he thought he got Arkle beat this time. And then he heard this thump, 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 Arkle coming past him absolutely effortlessly and just shot away.
He bet him, I think it was 32 lengths, and he set a track record at Sandown today, and that record still stands today.
When he won the Gallagher Gold Cup and gave Millhouse 16 pounds and broke the track record by 17 seconds, to think that a horse could break a track record by that much and carry the weight that he did, that was potentially the best performance of his career.
Having beaten all comers within
And other people collect stamps. I collect racing memorabilia. All I wanted to do was collect every race car that I could, or any little piece of memorabilia relating to Arkle. We would have approximately 250 items relating directly to Arkle. Now, they're mainly race cards and fan mail. Now, this is the saddle that Pat Taff used on Arkle, and to me, it was the ultimate piece of racing memorabilia. I bought it for 11,000 sterling, which I thought was, you know, it didn't matter what price it was going to be, I was going to buy it. And we just go around here, we have this particular race card. Now, in my opinion, this is Arkle's greatest race, the Gallagher Gold Cup of 1965.
To the left, over on the right, is Arkle, who's just eased his way into the picture.
This was a handicap, and Arkle carried 16 pounds more than Millhouse. And the word was that Millhouse was coming back to his best. There was a big anticipation about whether the difference of 16 pounds in weight would mean that Arkle would be beaten by Millhouse this time. And if you wonder about this, you can go and weigh out from sugar from your kitchen cupboard 16 pounds. It's quite a lot of weight difference to carry over 3 miles.
The Gallagher Gold Cup would have been the best performance I thought he ever put up. Millhouse had already won twice that season. He was having his first run. Running into the straight, I think Millhouse went about 6 lengths up, and everybody said, this is over. And the next thing like that has changed.
Millhouse was ridden by David Nicholson, and as Nicholson used to tell it, he thought he got Arkle beat this time. And then he heard this thump, 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 Arkle coming past him absolutely effortlessly and just shot away.
He bet him, I think it was 32 lengths, and he set a track record at Sandown today, and the record still stands today.
When he won the Gallagher Gold Cup and gave Millhouse 16 pounds and broke the track record by 17 seconds, to think that a horse could break a track record by that much and carry the weight that he did, that was potentially the best performance of his career.
Having beaten all comers with ease, Arkle was the undisputed king and no one wanted to challenge him.
There were some good horses around, but they looked for alternatives because there was no point. You know, you were just going to follow Arkle round. The irony was that the only horse that really was anywhere near him was virtually the next door box, Flying Bolt.
The stablemates were the best of their generation, but they'd never meet in a competitive race because they shared a trainer.
The only horse that would have taken him on was in the stable next door to him, Flying Bolt. For just a period of time in Flying Bolt's life, that he was definitely his equal. If not, maybe a shade better than him. But that's splitting hairs now. He definitely was his equal for about 18 months. Now, I don't know if he eyeballed Arkle eye to eye in a Gold Cup, whether he'd have beat him or not. But I definitely think he'd have warmed his tail end around 2.5 miles anyway.
Then comes Solbina, coming up towards the final fence now, and it's Flying Bolt going away.
We had another very good horse called Flying Bolt. And he was quite a character, wasn't he?
Oh, he was.
Well, he wasn't very pleasant, Annie, but in that go into the stable, you know, Arkle, quite different.
Flying Bolt was a vicious type of horse, you know. Like, no matter how confident you were about him, you couldn't just relax with him because he'd kick you, bite you, he'd do anything with you. He'd con you in the stable even, like.
And I hated riding him because every cow down and thing, you'd be ducking and diving, you'd be hanging off him the whole time, where you could go asleep around there on Arkle.
Flying Bolt had been very naughty before he was castrated. He got out of where he ought to have been in a paddock and he covered a she-ass. And I believe the mule or ginnet, whichever you call it, can beat everything going to the creamery in Patrick's Well.
Arkle at school with Flying Bolt one morning, the two of them. That's the only time they ever went together. I was riding him and Pat, and we couldn't pull them up, like they were taking one another on. You know, we went a hell of a speed up over the 4 fences, that's all I know, you know. It was a good, we're lucky we didn't hit one of them, or I don't know where we'd have finished, you know, but he never let them go again. We did work them together all right, but never jumped together, never.
That contest on the Draper Gallops would be the only time the two highest rated chasers ever would go head to head. Who would have prevailed in a competitive race remains one of the most tantalising unanswered questions in racing.
According to time form, Arkle was 212, Flying Bolt was 210, and then actually the next best is Steeplechaser, 192, and Star 191. Like, is that gap, is it realistic that there should be such a wide gap between Flying Bolt and the next best?
No, I wouldn't think so. I think that's someone's opinion, it's time form's opinion to elevate him to that position. No doubt Arkle and Flying Bolt were two great horses, but the horses that have come on behind have been great horses as well. Steeplechaser, Kato Star, Denman, Kicking King, all them horses.
We're talking about the greatest horse of all time, and yet next door to him there was a horse who's possibly the second greatest horse of all time, and arguably at times he equalled his performances.
A bit like Nichols with Kato and Denman at the same time, do you know what I mean?
But Kato Star and Denman, they're not the two best horses in living memory,
No,
whereas,
these
you know,
are.
But you know what I mean? Like, it's a huge coincidence, isn't it, that they're around the same era at the same time, living next door to each other, and they're like 20 pounds superior to the best horse that's run since.
And demonstrated just with Kato Star, I think for me he's been the best horse since that time. And I think he gets it because he was so dominant in his time.
And on different tracks as well.
Different tracks, different grounds.
Cheltenham.
He had all sort of the attributes of a really high-class horse. He had pace, he could travel, he could stay. I'd say if there was any horse that would have worried Arkle, now I still think he would have wanted 7 or 10 pound off him.
Yeah, but not 21.
No, no, not 21.
That's
the greatest.
I'm with you. Like, Kato Star for me. Like what you said as well. No, like the versatility that he displayed.
Yes.
With 2 Tingle Creeks, 5 King Georges, and 2 Gold Cups. You know, and to finish second in another Gold Cup. Like, it's a phenomenal range of abilities that he was able to
It's going
show.
to be very boring. I mean, we're talking from Arkle's time to now, and yet the three of us are saying the same thing. But I think Kato Star did epitomise all the attributes that Arkle had, but to me, not to the same level.
Everyone else is going to have their opinions, and you're never going to know the answer. And the Arkle camp will always stay in the Arkle camp, and the Kato Star camp will always be in that. But I think it's a hypothetical question because it never happened. But I guess there probably was nothing between them. It would have been really interesting. Really interesting. It's like comparing football teams of different eras. You know, how the hell would you ever know? But people have got opinions, and that's what makes it so good. And you know, as I said, it's all about opinions, and I've got mine and everyone else got theirs, sort of, and that's just how it is. But there couldn't have been a lot between Kato and Arkle.
Kato Star won 2 Cheltenham Gold Cups. As 1966 dawned, a rampant Arkle was on the brink of claiming his 3rd. Unbeatable, and the Gold Cup hat-trick looked a sure thing. The only horse that could beat Arkle was Arkle himself.
Arkle had won his 2 Gold Cups and he went back to complete the hat-trick as a 10-to-1 on shot. When you think about it, 10-to-1 on, so you have to have €10 on to win €1 or €100 to win €10 if you want to back him, if you want to get Arkle on side, which it's an incredibly short price for a Gold Cup, which is the blue ribbon of National Hunt Race. In theory, all the best horses, all the best staying chasers are running in this race, and Arkle's a 10-to-1 on shot to win it.
Once he got the better Mill House, the rest of his Gold Cups turned out to be kind of anticlimax. They were wind-down races for him, basically, at the end of each season.
That's right.
They would be the 2 of his easiest races. He's running against horses at level weights who he's, at this stage, he's probably 5 stones superior to some of them. So, like, it was a kind of a little holiday spin for him, really.
It's fundamentally an exhibition match. And the only thing is, because Arkle was very impetuous, slight danger that he might make a mistake or something. But that was really all you were thinking is could he fall, because basically you knew he was miles better than the other.
Another complete circuit. Oh, and he barely took off.
He just didn't take off. Parted the birch like the Red Sea. When you watch it again, it all happens so quickly. Pat Tuff instinctively shot his lower legs forward, lengthened the reins to keep the balance, to keep him in the saddle. A lot of jockeys would have fallen off, even though Arkle didn't fall himself.
Why did he do it? Who knows? Maybe he had a look at the crowds, or maybe he saw the stands, or maybe he heard the noise, but he just didn't seem to jump the fence. He didn't seem to see it.
And just left a hole in the fence. Didn't stop him, went on and won the race. Any other horse would have been on the floor.
He just looked at it and ignored it. And how he got the other side, well, you should have heard the gasp from the crowd here. It looked as though he wasn't going to jump at all.
The partnership stayed together. He found a leg, as they say in racing, but it was a heart-stopping moment now.
Pat Taff had saved Arkle, or perhaps Arkle had saved Pat Taff. Either way, that legendary empathy between horse and rider had snatched another memorable victory from the jaws of defeat.
Wonderful jockey, wonderful horseman. I think he complimented the horse enormously. I don't think Pat himself would say he was going to be the sort of stylist of all times, but he was wonderful on this horse. He obviously knew him backwards.
Pat Taff had his unique way of riding. He was a horseman as much as anything, but he just got on brilliantly with that horse, knew him, and they just trusted each other, and they knew each other inside out, and that relationship is very important between horse and jockey.
Well, I've got great confidence in him, and like, he gets me out of any trouble that I get into in a race, and he can accelerate at the finish just the same as if you were driving a Rolls Royce. When you put your foot in the accelerator, he leaves the rest.
When people differentiate between a horseman and a jockey, what they mean is that a jockey is skilled and stylish and rides a finish, you know, is neat and tidy. Horsemanship skills, though, arguably way more important in that you can, you know, you're in tune with the horse, you understand the horse, you can get a horse settled, get him jumping, see your stride, get inside his mind and know what's going to help him or what's going to make him tick, and Pat Taff was brilliant at that.
I remember Paddy Prendergast used to say, sure, he said, no, he's a terrible rider. They ought to put a jock on him. They ought to put a jockey on that horse. You know? He was a lovely horseman and a charming man.
Pat Taff and Arkle now set their eyes on a second hat-trick with a third win in the 1966 Hennessy. But it wasn't to be. Giving away 35 pounds in weight, his extraordinary two-year winning streak was ended by Stallbridge Colonist.
So he was beaten narrowly by Stallbridge Colonist. He then went to Ascot, where they had recently started jump racing, and he won a valuable race there. He then went to Kempton Park for the 1966 King George, for which he was an absolute certainty.
Well, I was actually there. It was the first time I went with my mother. My dad stayed at home. I went with my mother to Kempton. He was going along fine, and then from about 2/3 away, all of a sudden things didn't seem that great.
He looked as if everything was going perfectly all right until the very far end of the Kempton racecourse. And then he just wasn't coming away from Dormant as you'd expect.
He led over the last fence, but he was clearly in trouble, and he faltered badly and was caught just before the line by a horse called Dormant.
Dormant was just a journeyman horse. The idea that Dormant could beat Arkle was, you know, it's absolutely not possible.
The unthinkable had happened. How could Arkle, the horse of the century, have lost to a lesser being like Dormant?
For a moment, people thought, because Stallbridge had beaten him in the Hennessy, and that maybe he was starting to wane or something, that he was becoming vulnerable.
It was discovered thereafter that Arkle had probably run a good part of the race with a broken foot, which shows something about the courage of the horse.
We walked the course, and the ditch, they had a sort of a clay thing, and was a mark. Whether it was his or not, we thought it was. Remember, his foot went in under the top rail of the ditch, and we believed that that's where he got his foot going up.
I think it was until Maxie Cosby flew over and read the x-rays and all that type of stuff, I was still thinking that he was going to run the Gold Cup. Like, that's how naive I would have been about an injury like that.
He was x-rayed, and it showed that he had fractured a pedal bone, which is a bone right inside the hoof. So there was devastation.
It's a very serious injury. It's a fracture involving a very vital bone.
Is there any likelihood now that Arkle might race again this season?
Oh, no. I think that's out.
Well, he's not in any pain, which is great relief. And I was afraid he would be, but he's not, and Mr. Cosgrave was quite satisfied about that.
Arkle's injury wasn't mere racing news, it was a national disaster.
They say there are a lot of things you remember in life. We're all meant to remember when Kennedy was assassinated. But I can remember that night when Arkle was injured, and there was a bulletin on the radio, and racing probably didn't in those days get a lot of mentions. The only horse that was going to get racing onto the radio was Arkle.
The horse's distress prompted a groundswell of sympathy from his followers.
Looking back now, the outpouring of public concern for Arkle, it was a manifestation of his popularity as a racehorse and the affection with which general public viewed him.
And we had one gorgeous envelope that arrived, Arkle Island near London, which I thought was rather fun. It had come from Hamburg, I think. I've got a secretary now that deals with his fan mail, because I got quite out of hand. I couldn't keep pace at all.
I remember being utterly bereft and thinking that it was almost like a death in the family, and I had to be talked round and reassured that he'd be all right. I still remember the tears, yeah.
18 months of recovery later, Arkle's comeback was penciled in for Fairy House in April 1968. His adoring public were ready for an emotional reunion.
Arkle to the Irish public as something very special, and the crowd gathered at Fairy House to pay homage to a horse that has given such great honour to the country and indeed such great pleasure to so many people.
We all wanted to be there to see him, this comeback. It would have been some hoolie to just see him come back there.
They were going to farm a race out for him at Fairy House, and then Pat came down one morning here, and we done a good bit of work. We tried to do a good bit of work with him, and he wasn't right. He wasn't certainly striding out the way he was, and Pat, when he pulled up, he said, no, we're not going any further. He's not himself, and that's it. So the boss man said, that's it, you know, he's not racing anymore.
I don't think the comeback was ever believable, credible, or on. The world moves on.
When he went back into training, Pat Toff and Tom Draper rather thought that he'd lost some of his old zip and fire.
You decided that, well, there'd be no more Arkle on the racecourse?
Yes. Yeah, very reluctantly, but I think it was right.
The retirement years passed quickly. Arthritis soon robbed Arkle of his speed and strength, and by 1970 he struggled to stand up. The decision was made to put him to sleep.
It's always sad looking back on what might have been, but when you look now at the performance of horses, 12, 13 even, it beggars belief what he could have done.
If he stayed sound, he might have equalled Golden Miller, who won 5 Gold Cups. There was no reason why he wouldn't have won 2 more. And he might have surpassed him and won 6 Gold Cups, because the horses that came on behind him, definitely for the next 3 years, none of them would have beat him.
He stopped when he was still at his peak, and therefore people always remember him, you know, as this great wonder that strode the racecourse quite briefly.
Arkle raced continually over a number of seasons, met practically every challenge that was set to him, and set a standard that has not been equalled.
He was the horse of the time and of all time.
No other horse has ever captured the imagination of the world.
Arkle wasn't merely one of the great racing experiences of my